Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Gaming Daddy channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. So today's video, I really want to raise a very critical point. I really want to, mention a few things that may sound a little controversial or a little, I would say, confusing when you kind of factor in everything. And these things relate to the Division franchise. And, these are hypothetical questions. And this could be something that is useful for the way we actually look at these video games, especially from the Division side of things. Now, one thing about Ubisoft is they have a lot of success. People may not necessarily understand why this might be the statement that I'm making, but it is gonna make more sense when I continue to expound more and more on this video. And they've had a lot of success, but it's only to an extent. It's kind of one of these capped, limited successes that they've had, and that success by itself is very simple. They've been able to release a huge number of games that they've actually promised to release. The games that they have actually marketed, games they've talked about, they've been able to ship those games. Now, why I said it's a limited and a capped success is because many times these games have come out in broken states. They've come out in situations where players don't enjoy them and cannot play them. But at the end of the day, that success that I'm speaking about is actually being discussed in light of other incidences that do happen around the gaming industry that many times we don't even know about unless they're spoken of. In fact, a game that has been canceled, in my opinion, way back, years ago, will more than likely never ever be spoken of or talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and show an example of a video game that was actually canceled, a very anticipated video game, by the way, that got canceled because of extenuating circumstances that they could not even control. And even in those times and in those seasons or periods, some other studios were still able to drop some solid entries regardless of that time and that season. Now, in perusing around the internet, I, basically look at multiple fronts of, video game audiences. I have two video game, YouTube channels. One of them covers DC games, the Batman games and all. And there are other creators in that space. Just today, one of the creators in that space was talking about a thread that was put together by a developer who worked on a Superman game that was never released. In fact, the thread is a long thread. It has pictures, concept art, a lot of the details. And the developer was also answering questions from people who were curious about everything that this game actually did entail. In fact, let's first read the beginning of the thread so that you can see this very interesting and unfortunate situation. The developer writes, in 2007/2008, I was lead designer on a Superman game that was never released. Reason, because the economy crashed hard. It killed our publisher, our studio, Factor 5, and the game. This person also writes, I have multiple unreleased games through my career, but this is the only one I mourn to this day. Folks, this is one of those really interesting things where if you really were anticipating a video game like this, or if you were anticipating, say, even, a superhero game or any game you've been anticipating that has gone through this, you basically know how disappointing it is. But many times we've been really amiss, or we've missed the mark in trying to speculate why these games were never really completed, because this footage actually did leak at one point and people were able to kind of see that there really was a Superman game in development. I mean, look here, there's actually a fight sequence with Superman versus Doomsday. And so everybody was like, wow, why did Warner Brothers, the publisher of this particular game, why did they not step in to ensure that this project was completed and, this project was delivered to fans? And the truth is, the financial recession or crash of the 2007-2008 period pretty much decimated every single hope that this game would have had. Imagine if a game like this, yes, being made at that time, there wasn't, even the PlayStation 3 technology, was the available technology at that time. Maybe it would have released at the, far end of the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 cycle, and maybe would have gotten remasters in the PS4 and Xbox One cycles. This would have still been a solid entry for the superhero genre at that time. Because, if you guys were to remember, just a few years later, Rocksteady was able to still deliver the Arkham Asylum project, which really did change superhero gaming in its entirety. Now, here is how I believe this could be pertaining to some of the successes that Ubisoft has had. Now, Ubisoft is one of those companies that is resilient. They just keep releasing these games. They're able to still drop games even in some really weird, awkward situations. I say this a lot because sometimes it's easy for us to kind of gloss over because, we don't play a lot of these games, or we don't like the way these games release. Like Watch Dogs Legion, not really exactly what players in many cases were wanting, but people bought the game because it was one of the games that offered the next gen capabilities. And then you also have games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Many of the Assassin's Creed fans, even the ones that enjoyed Odyssey and even Origins, weren't big fans of Valhalla. They said it was boring and all of that. And then you had Immortals Phoenix Rising, which was the one game out of the three that did receive a lot of I would say love, in terms of this is a new entry for Ubisoft. They got to do this game justice because it was a fresh take on some of their games. Yes, it had some Assassin's Creed elements, and yes, it was basically Zelda for PC, but it was something that was out of the norm or out of the ordinary for Ubisoft. Now I ask myself, The Division and even say a game like XDefiant and a game like Heartland, I wonder if Ubisoft is not getting itself in a situation where it's stretching itself too thin across some of these IPs that are not necessarily I would say advantageous to their entirety of their process, their player base, and even what they actually are able to accomplish as a company. I fear that because of their successes in being able to drop games even in the middle of or right at the tail end of all the medical issues of 2022, this is Ubisoft, by the way, they dropped 3 games and they pushed back a bunch of others. And even this year, we're not going to have the year close out, hopefully if everything goes well, without seeing at least one Ubisoft entry into the market. Whereas studios like Warner Brothers have moved everything possible that they can to 2022. And so I'm just saying perhaps Ubisoft might be in a position where it's probably stretching its teams and not using them to harness the potential of some of their very significant games and being able to bring these games to the spotlight and really own the market. So I think what's happening is this. They have talent, number one. They have expertise, number two. They have process, number three. These are things that I've observed, by the way. They also have reach, number four. Basically, reach is they have a wide spread of games in different genres, even music games. I mean, literally Just Dance and I think what's the Rocksmith or whatever it is, Ubisoft runs those games. They're even trying to bring out the Riders Republic, which is going to be an open world open space, extreme sports or whatever kind of sports type game. They have racing games. They got all of it. That's a huge library of different games that other studios would probably be begging for. I wonder if at this point that they've been able to expand their library, is that expansion not enough? Because seeing the way they're going with the XDefiant game, I don't necessarily think that it's a game that they should have basically worked on at this moment. If anything, they should have taken that XDefiant concept and made it a fresh new concept in the first-person shooter genre. Yes, they have Far Cry, but that's already its own genre by itself. Open world, first person, grunge, exploration, crazy, psychotic, demented boss, all of those things, they fit into what Far Cry is. I could say, people can basically just take any game and say, yeah, it's a Far Cry wannabe, in the informal sense. But a game like XDefiant, I feel like could have been refreshed and done as a brand new, startup IP. And I think that's where it would have really made a lot of sense. Sure, the competition to try to get into the PvP market right now and the free-to-play market seems to be attractive, but it may not necessarily be what Ubisoft needs right now, because constantly we're seeing that they continue to fail or are not as appealing as they could be with the free-to-play market. And so in taking a whole team like Ubisoft San Francisco to make a game like that, when they could be harnessing a studio with that kind of a development talent, knowledge of the Snowdrop engine to potentially work on a game like Heartland, to me does not seem like a good use of resources. And if you look at the story that we just read with the Superman game that got canceled, I'm not going to go ahead and say Ubisoft is too big that they cannot face a situation like that. Right now in the world that we're in, there are so many uncertainties. Things are changing so fast, and any little thing could affect, an industry that may be part of the industries that are our favorites. In fact, if you go back and read that thread, there was also a movie that was supposed to be released coinciding with the release of this Superman game, but that movie did not even happen itself. So the economy on a broad sense, not just that gamers are not purchasing games or gamers are purchasing games, could also be something that influences the way these these companies are able to remain successful. Ubisoft has enjoyed a lot of success in building its catalog, and I think they are continuing to spread too far rather than dig in deep with the existing catalog that they have. And I fear that this is something that will more than likely hurt this studio and the publisher itself and its studios on the long term if somebody does not, in a sense, correct the ship. So what do I mean by digging in deep? Okay, so they have the technicals far and wide. It's reaching out on different, genres and different areas of video games. Now, digging deep will be following, say, the pattern of two of their biggest franchises, which are Assassin's Creed and Far Cry. You see, with The Division, we haven't necessarily gotten that deep into the digging. With Ghost Recon, they've done a good job, which Ghost Recon has been established for so many years. With the Rainbow Six, they've also done a good job, which those games under the Tom Clancy name have also been established for years. But it seems like they've dialed back. The way X-Defiant is looking seemed like just one of the step backs, rather than them doubling down to correct the issues from a game like Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which released in a very broken state and in kind of a lackluster state, if you were to even ask me. Not necessarily broken, but lackluster, because yes, I played the game on PC and it seemed to run well, but it just was not a game that was appealing. In a sense of The Division, they've only had 2 Division titles. They're working on Heartland, which I commend them for actually taking that step. But with the amount of Assassin's Creed games that have been released, about 22 or more, and the amount of Far Cry games that have been released, about 7 or maybe more, I would think that they will probably be harnessing and pursuing more into games like The Division, potentially even with their new, introduction into the Immortals Phoenix Rising game, that they're pursuing more and more into that, rather than trying their hands on these free-to-play games that don't seem to be what their studio is about. You can tell when a studio is out of their comfort zone, and when they're trying to do something just because they want to kind of catch a market that might be there or not be there. And I think with the Hyperspace, the way they started out that whole thing, it just really looked like it was a little superficial. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think that was a lesson from Hyperspace, and that might be the lesson from X-Defiant if Ubisoft does not find a way to mitigate that. Now, here's where there's a silver lining. With the X-Defiant game, there's also the Heartland game that's also being worked on. Perhaps those people who may not care for X-Defiant will dive into Heartland and have no problems or any issues even bothering if the X-Defiant game even exists or not. I think that's one of the things that they're trying to do as well. They're trying to hedge themselves. But again, that hedging themselves, to me, I feel like is a waste of resources. Now, let's look in The Division and see where they've also made this same kind of critical error before. They did this with the hardcore mode, the beta. Remember, right before Warlords of New York was released, they were saying, well, we're working on this project, and there's actually a team that had been working on this hardcore mode, and they're pretty excited about it, but it's a beta, and it doesn't take away resources from the content that we're working on. I remember making a video specifically at that time saying, I feel like this was a waste of resources, because if the hardcore mode is a beta, are they wanting to expand it, or is there something they wish to do with it? Well, behold, hardcore mode remains a beta till this day. Now, the team that worked on hardcore mode, even if they were just 4 people, I would argue that those 4 or however many people could have been taken and actually put in an incubator to start working on some extra content that, if they had already started something solid and something that was approved by the associate director, by now there would not be a huge scramble for content. If anything, they would have been harnessing and finishing and polishing the content and delivering it by this particular time. I think all that excess and waste of time has probably come back to haunt a studio like Ubisoft, who has a lot to deal with already, and the time management and the way that they manage their resources is something that's going to be telling very soon in the next few years. So with all of what happened last year, with the delays we're seeing, with the constant changes in the entire industry and the way the world is changing right now, there's not going to be any room for any error. I think right now a studio, like Massive, and a publisher like Ubisoft has eaten a potential 24-month loss in momentum, time, and even product development. And this is what we're going to see. Other studios, on the other hand, that have been working on very, singular mindsets, or just focusing on one particular project, are more than likely going to be the ones that come out on top, because those projects are their major focus, or they're just diving deeper into the things that they're already established in. So this is pretty much the premise of my video. I wanted to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Do you think that on the long term, Ubisoft is going to be able to continue their experimentation phase, or should they continue to dig into their established franchises for now And then when they get potentially, say a good backup catalog, maybe 5 years worth, then they can then start tinkering and playing around. Talk to me in the comment section. Peace out.